Hi, once again. This is a homily for the sixth Sunday in Ordinary Time. And as I've said 1,000 times before, these ordinary Sundays are very much teaching us, coaching us how to live in this world. Today, we're hearing about the whole way of life that, first of all, the Jews followed, and then the Christians learned to follow as well. And this is a life under the law. This idea of law is that it is God's law, and so it's not manipulable. Uh, we are used to human laws being arbitrarily created, then arbitrarily applied, and judgments being arbitrarily rendered. And so we get kind of a very wishy-washy idea of law. But in fact, it's God who by his law created this world, literally as a place shaped by his law, and shaped in a positive sense, because we can actually flourish if we live under God's law. And so what we start with is a little piece of the book of Sirach. If you choose, you can keep the commandments. That's it. There's no hedging. Well, I'm not psychologically disposed, or I had bad parents, or, um, I got angry with my boss this week, so that entitled me to ignore the law, and so on and so on. We have this industry of excusing ourselves from following God's law, and yet Sirach puts it very simply. If you want to follow the law, you can follow the law. So that's where we start. Uh, then the next line kind of buttresses that, because if you trust in God, you too shall live. In other words, do we have the trust that God's law actually is the best thing for us? Absolutely crucial consideration, and we need to look into our hearts to see, in fact, how little we trust God's law, if we can always hedge on that by doing something ourselves that will, we imagine anyway, protect us, keep us secure, make us happy, all these things which are the reasons why people don't follow the law. But if we get back into following the law, we will see that we are happy and secure and actually have a flourishing future before us. Now, he goes into blunt detail, just as Moses did so many years before. Before man are life and death, good and evil. Whichever he chooses shall be given to him. So this is not something that comes like a lightning bolt from the sky. We have already made 1,000 choices that have built our lives in a way that brings us good or brings us evil. This is not complicated in any way at all. We make it complicated so that we can excuse ourselves, but in fact, it's not complicated. Uh, Now, then it goes on to explain why this law is so amazing. Immense is the wisdom of God. Uh, he understands man's every deed. No one does he command to act unjustly. So really and truly, we have got to learn what true justice is, and not some political party's idea of justice, but what is God's idea of justice? How do I become a just man or a just woman in this society and behave like that, whether it's to my apparent advantage or to my apparent disadvantage? Because quite often I'll see the advantage only long after. Oh, I was just there, and therefore that opened up a whole lot of new doorways for me in my life. Moving on, then, we have the psalm. The antiphon is, "Blessed are they who follow the law of the Lord," literally what Sirach has been saying. Um, the additional element is that we are blessed. We actually achieve a blessed state of life right here in this world. And this goes for everybody in every station of life. And that's another thing. People think that because their station in life is so unique. No, it isn't. There are probably only 50 or 100 million people who have the same kind of life as we do. Oh, well, I had too much money. I had too much suffering in my family. And I'm not saying suffering in a family is not bad, but the number of people who agonize on television about their, in fact, rather trivial lives is really a, a misleading way of looking at the world. If every person realized that there were 200 or 300 million people who are having exactly the same kind of life as I am, and they're getting on with it, so why can't I get on with it? Uh, the second reading is from Paul to the Corinthians, and he's saying we speak of wisdom to those who are mature. In other words, this is people who have grown up enough to be able to say, you know what, God's law is a good law. I'm going to live by that. And he goes then into the quality of God's wisdom, which we can't spend time on. But basically, not only do we follow God's law or are asked to, but the Spirit scrutinizes everything, even the depths of God. So the law comes to us through the Spirit of God. It comes from the very interior life of God himself. And then we learn that law, and the Spirit helps us to live the law. What do you think conscience is all about? But again, a informed conscience. Adolf Hitler had a conscience, but unfortunately it was totally unformed and probably psychotic. And that wasn't an excuse, by the way, because he knew enough to be able to say, well, okay, despite all my inclinations in that psychotic way, I can in fact learn to live by God's law. He didn't, and he will pay. Now, lastly, we have the gospel. This is a very detailed gospel, but basically Jesus is saying one thing. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. So in other words, the law didn't disappear when Jesus came. If you look very carefully, and people like Thomas Aquinas do this routinely because they understand Old Testament, New Testament are intimately interrelated. But Jesus, in fact, came to fulfill all of the elements of the law, the social law, the cultic law, the juridical law, and he followed those to the nth degree, which led him to a life of extreme sacrifice and extreme fulfillment. And that is where we get past this idea that law is just something that we can manipulate or excuse ourselves from. Thank you very much.